Greetings, everyone. Welcome back to ManifestED. My name is John Farrar, and joining me today, we have Maria Anguiano and Jenny Minnesali. I'm going to get it to Jenny in a second, but just as a refresher, this is our YouTube channel where we talk to some of the best and most innovative leaders that we have in the space. And we're very, very excited to have one of those with us today, as we are going to be focusing on, I think, is one of the pioneers in certainly online learning, virtual learning, all things higher education, and that is Arizona State University. So Jenny, who is sort of my partner in crime today, I'm going to kick it over to you to introduce Maria and give everybody a little bit of background on her.
Great. Well, thank you, John. As John mentioned, today we have a very special guest, Maria Anguiano, who is the Executive Vice President of the Learning Enterprise at Arizona State University. Thank you, Maria, for joining us. We are especially excited to have you as a guest today. For those of our listeners who may not know, ASU is ranked by U.S. News and World Report as #1 in innovation and has achieved that ranking for 7 years in a row now. So we are really looking forward to hearing more from you, Maria, today on some of those innovative projects that you're spearheading at ASU. So to kick us off, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background? When did you join ASU? A little bit on that end would be great.
Thanks, Jenny and John, for having me on today. Manifest, really excited to be in this conversation with you, and you're such great partners to ASU. So just really excited for today. To give a little background on myself, now currently Executive Vice President of the Learning Enterprise, as you mentioned, and it's been a long road from where I started, which is as a, I would say first generation student growing up in San Diego with a single mother, really raising us and only having she only had a 6th grade education. And so interestingly, that happened because where she grew up in Mexico, basically education was not free after 6th grade. And so her family had to stop her attending school. And so school became this really important thing for her to instill in her children in terms of there's an amazing opportunity in this country for, fairly accessible free education up to K through 12. And that we should really take advantage of that because not everyone in the world has access to this. And so that really started off, I think, my passion for educational access and affordability, even at a young age. I ended up going to Claremont McKenna College on a full scholarship. Again, very, basically picked it because of the full scholarship. And so I also know how important the financial aid and affordability is for students, especially low-income students going to college for the first time. It's difficult to, when you see those tuition, price tags, to think that you could go there when, it's like 3 times the amount that your parents make for the year. And so, I keep that in mind every day in my work. So that was very impactful as well. But I was very fortunate, was able to get a full ride, ended up working at Deloitte actually right after school, then transitioned into business school and worked at Lehman Brothers and in finance after that. And then really wanted to make the transition once I had some real functional expertise in both finance and accounting, really wanted to go back to my passion, which is educational access. And so I ended up, again, very fortunate, ended up getting an opportunity to work at the University of California Office of the President as Chief of Staff to the CFO there. And it was during the 2008, 2009 kind of financial crash. And so it was one of those learned very quickly because UC had lost $800 million of funding. And we had to figure out how to operate more efficiently, more effectively with that huge loss of funding. And so it was one of those things where I really had to learn very quickly how these systems operate and how we could best serve our students and ensure that, they weren't impacted by these big changes. And so, from there ended up being Vice Chancellor Planning and Budget at UC Riverside, working on kind of long-term capital planning for universities for a few years. And then now here at ASU, from my kind of learnings there is I learned very quickly that the traditional model of planning for growth for universities was just not financially sustainable, nor was going to lead to accessible, affordable options for students. And so I really was excited to join ASU, where we were thinking about the trajectory of higher ed in a totally different way. Hopefully that wasn't too long.
No, that was wonderful. I appreciate all of the background and hearing more about your passion for education and how that started. So thank you for that. At ASU, you oversee both enrollment and non-enrollment revenue opportunities. So what can you tell us about these non-enrollment opportunities and what do those look like?
Yeah. What's interesting is that we don't even have a language for what we're doing here at Learning Enterprise, right? The fact that we have to use this word enrollment or non-enrollment, it kind of reminds me of, kind of if you think about old business models like Blockbuster saying, well, how many movies did you go rent versus like a Netflix that's like, well, how many subscribers do you have engaging with you, right? And it's just different words. These old ones don't apply. So I would say, I think first and foremost, Learning Enterprise is focused on serving learners at all stages in their life. And so that means reimagining how we're actually counting the learners we serve. That makes sense. And so, we serve all learners between, anything from pre-K to 80 plus, post-retirement, and everything in between. And different learners at those stages need different things, right? And it also, as an individual learner, your needs evolve pretty dramatically between the ages of 5 to 80, right? And so we're really trying to figure out, just how many learners are actually engaged with us in ASU. And as a public research university, our mission and vision is to serve the whole public, and that means all learners. And so we're looking at number of learners engaged with ASU as a key metric for success, thinking about whether that's engaging with us in short form content, the work we're doing with YouTube in terms of creating short form content to help students understand what is college, how do you apply for financial aid, what is a major, all those things may not be enrollment, but it's learning that people are doing, and so we want to make sure we're capturing that type of learning. We also have another term for kind of what we're calling enrolled students, but it's a very, I would say, time-specific number, if that makes sense. Because at some point, learners go from being, maybe you're just engaging, a little bit, to, hey, it's time for you to actually, let's say, get a degree. And now this is in a period of very intensive learning with ASU, where you're very focused, but post-graduation, you're still engaging with ASU. Right. And so we're more thinking about it less transactional and more points in time in your life. How engaged are you with ASU, on a level 1 to 5, let's call it.
Thanks, Maria. And so just to dig in a little bit more on how ASU's Learning Enterprise was developed. So how did the original concept come to be? Were you starting to see this interest of, K through post-grad demand, or how did that initially start, and what was the reaction at the university?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. ASU has a very a charter that we follow that everyone at the university can quote, right? Which is, we're a comprehensive research university measured by not by who we exclude, but by who we include and how they succeed. We're advancing research and discovery of public value, and we assume fundamental responsibilities for the economic, social, cultural, and overall health of the communities we serve, right? And so I would say Learning Enterprise is an outgrowth of that charter, which is to say we were looking at, clearly ASU has made college accessibility very, very, it's grown tremendously over the last 10, 20 years. We now serve 150,000 students in our degree programs. So tremendous expansion there. But when we look at our charter about inclusion, there's a lot of other people that were not engaging with ASU. And taking fundamental responsibilities for the communities we serve means ensuring we're serving everyone in the community, right? And so it really was an outgrowth of like, well, how can we actually do that more effectively? And so the idea of the learning enterprise was created to serve the entire community and to acknowledge the fact that, yes, we want to make sure our students are super successful, but there's also a lot of other people. It's kind of like opening the force field of the university to only the people that were involved in the degree programs, to now kind of taking those and creating goalposts into the university saying, look, we have something for everyone, right? And so I think it's been really well, because everyone is so grounded at ASU in the charter. It's a very easy extension of what we were already doing. And I will say, if anything, we were already pursuing a lot of these things in a little bit of a siloed manner, or in kind of little entrepreneurial pockets. And so the Learning Enterprise gave us an opportunity to also consolidate those efforts so that we could scale them more effectively, right? So we have this amazing program, for example, that a faculty member started called Ask a Biologist. And it's his project. He's had it for over 10 years, or no, even more. In 1997, he started this project. And it's an amazing website with anything you ever would want to know about biology, really centered for kind of K through 12 population. Has games. It's super engaging. It's very low risk. You don't have to worry about like, oh, I'm going to fail something, because you can engage at your own pace, etc. And that's one of those efforts that was already engaging the community. That is Learning Enterprise. We're bringing it together and say, well, how do we get this Ask a Biologist website out to even more schools and more students? And by having a consolidated kind of Learning Enterprise effort, we're able to project these assets to a much wider population.
Jenny, I was just going to jump in and kind of follow up on that. ASU's blazed the trail on so many things. And essentially what you're talking about is kind of changing the definition of a university in a lot of ways. And one of our flagship universities, going from this idea that universities in the United States anyway, whether real or just perceived, their role is to educate human beings between the ages of 18 to 24 in certain spots in America, but not really as a lifelong learning tool. To your point, what life station are you in, and what learning do you need, and how do we provide that? I guess I'm curious, right? Again, certainly ASU's been the progressive in the space and on the leading edge of it. But do you think this will change how we look at our flagship universities and their role definition overall? Or, if you're biased, I don't know, is this going to be unique to kind of ASU going forward? It's so exciting seeing what you're doing. I'm obviously hoping that category expansion is a thing, but I'm curious from your unique vantage point, how you're seeing the space evolve, and therefore the roles of universities evolve.
I think we're at the early stages of this. In fact, there's been different waves of different types of universities over the history of universities, starting from the little small Greek academies, right, 400, 500 years ago, to recently, in the 1800s, this idea of the land-grant research university, and those expanding across the US. So I think we're yet in another point of evolution for universities, expanding, to your point, John, the very definition of who we serve and what we're doing. And I think because we're in the early stages, I'm sure the first land grant or two was also like, well, what does this mean now that's different from before? And more universities will be able to serve, because I think that's at the heart of all these public research universities and public universities is this want and need to serve the public. And it's just a matter of like, how do we actually go about doing that, right? And find the resources to do so.
And building on that, Maria, what do these sort of public nonprofit players like ASU need to really advance this initiative? It sounds like you're at the early stages. So how are you thinking about the future and how you can sort of accelerate your initiative?
That's a great question, Jenny. And frankly, one of the reasons we're talking today, right, is we really think partnerships are so important to expanding access. It's not something that ASU sees that we can do alone. Hence why we have hundreds of partnerships. And I think a really key partner is, or key set of partners are our corporate partners and our industry partners. Ultimately, a lot of education is about economic and social mobility and economic opportunity, right? And in order to be able to provide that effectively for any of our learners at whatever stage in life they're in, we need to know, well, what is what are the gaps in industry? What are employers looking for? And how can we best address that? And we're only going to do that in partnership with the folks that are out there seeing what is needed, especially on the curriculum front. That's been critical for us. And John, can I mention our partnership now on the Google IT certificate? Or great. So, one of the exciting projects we have is integrating the Google IT certificate, one of these super high quality, so well known certificates to allow people to get entry level jobs into the IT field, and integrating that with our own academic curriculum and to create credit bearing courses. So now people don't have to decide whether am I doing college and academic credit, or am I more focused on an industry credential? It's like, guess what? You can actually do both together at the same time and not have to choose. You could do both. And so you can start your career right away, but also know that you have college credits that you can build on to get more significant credentials. And so, we think partners like that and partnerships like this one are the ones that are really going to help us serve learners well.
That part's super exciting. There's going to be this probably will air after that a broader announcement is made, but I know already we've seen many ASU students sign up for that cert. And I think what's exciting about that is just what you said, which is the ability to then combine, I think, hard skills that the marketplace is demanding with what I think universities do really well, which is surrounding those hard skills with what I would call success skills, how to present, how to lead, all those other things, and get the best of both on the back end. What we see in our certs is that 40 to 60% of the people who have certs already have degrees. So essentially the marketplace is telling us, hey, I'd like to get both here. Let's do that. And that's what I think is really, really exciting about this first cert integration with y'all. I'm so excited to see where this can go, not just with our content, but others that provide similar certs in the marketplace. And increasingly, more and more companies are offering that, which I have to believe will just gain momentum over time.
Yeah, and building on that, here at Google, we are really starting to see interest grow around these alternative pathways like certificates that we were just discussing, short courses, boot camps. We're hearing now that around 34% of prospective students are saying they're interested in short courses as a way to upscale and reach higher paying jobs. So Maria, we'd love to hear your thoughts a little bit more on how are you seeing demand change outside of those traditional students? What are these sort of new lifelong learning students looking for?
Yeah, and I would say there's also it's not just new students, is students that are coming up that are been told their whole lives that college is for them, and then now they're getting to college age and there's no spots. So, right. So there's this issue to address, that there's a very large population of students that need pathways into a university setting that are in that traditional, what we would consider traditional set, but actually historically have been underrepresented and not had the opportunity. So I just wanted to acknowledge that population as well, because there's many other populations as well that are the lifelong learners and, only don't need, either already have a degree, don't need a degree, just want to get that job. And we want to be super responsive to them as well. But there's also a whole set of folks that actually do want pathways into a university. And that's where I think the boot camps, and I won't call them alternative pathways, we like to call them basically expanded success pathways, because what we're hoping to do is actually combine things that have felt alternative in the past and actually make them feel a lot more mainstream, streamlined, and connect them into a traditional academic pathway, right? So that they're people that are doing a boot camp or have a certificate don't feel like, well, they've chosen a different road and now they don't have access to kind of the what I'll call traditional 4-year degree. It's not so much traditional. Normally you think of, as the residential piece too. But we have 75,000 online students that are degree seeking, and most would consider them in the alternative category in the sense that the average age of those students is 29, right? And so it is an older population, one that a lot of universities aren't necessarily serving, and yet here they are doing amazingly and really excited that they have an opportunity to pursue a great quality research grade degree while they're working, while they have family obligations, while they can't move to Arizona. So it's really figuring out who are these learners, are they place bound? Are they working full time? And then figuring out, well, what are those learning offerings that we can either partner with others to enhance or create ourselves to better serve those learners.
Quick question on how you see that evolution of modality, right? Obviously, we went just through a 2-year period where COVID forced a lot of us, maybe uncomfortably, into a virtual learning mode. But I think we're seeing more and more students get used to that, what I call the life ROI that comes with it, being able to handle another job, take care of a parent, a child, what have you. And then what we used to call 18 to 24-year-olds, I'm wondering what ASU is seeing, or do you think we will start to see more of what we used to call traditional students lean into the flexibility of online, and how will that impact campuses and how they're designed, all those things? I'm curious to get, again, ASU's take, since you're usually on the leading edge of understanding these things.
Yeah, no, that's such a great question, John. And I think about it so much too. And frankly, we as a society probably have a lot of work to do to even evolve to me, it's always like language, and even having language to describe the fact that we talk about virtual learning and in-person learning actually doesn't describe the learning at all, in the sense that the pedagogy is actually super important, right? And so when you think about, let's take the in-person learning. Well, are you in a 20-person seminar? Are you in an active learning forum? Or are you sitting in a 600-person lecture hall in the top row, barely hearing what's going on? Okay, well, so in-person says nothing about the quality of the instruction, neither does virtual, right? So I think there's like this work to be done as educators to say, well, we got to get a lot more nuanced about how we talk about courses and pedagogy and like quality of instruction and what that means and how do we measure that. So kind of that's thing one. I do think that there will be a huge modality expansion from even, the traditional, like you said, 18 to 24-year-old set that is maybe living at by the campus in a residential setting, but wants to have all the optionality of the different pedagogies that we could offer, whether it's a 20-person, Zoom-like seminar, whether it's an asynchronous adaptive learning course in math, because they really need to have this AI-enabled math learning that's actually more effective than them sitting in a classroom, not getting attention, from an instructor. And so I think we'll see basically this push of what's the best modality for what type of content and what type of discipline and at what level, right? So I'm hoping that our conversation as educators just gets a lot more nuanced and sophisticated around the space.
Yeah, I think it's that nuance that I'm very interested to see how it evolves. And I'll use myself as an example. I was not a great how it evolves in terms of the classroom experience. So again, I'll use myself as an example. Wasn't a great note taker. Would furiously write down professor lecture notes when I could. But I now sit here and go, man, I wish I could have just had that lecture recorded so I could go backwards and forwards and go over a point. It would have been much better for me. And so I now wonder, are we going to get to the point where that does become like the lectures are kind of online, and then the in-class experience is maybe way different? The attraction going in class is for labs and presentations and teamwork and coaching and mentoring from the professor, because the lecture is maybe virtually stored, even for, again, on-campus students. Anyway, I'm fascinated. I don't know if you have additional thoughts on the in-class experience and how that evolves, but I'm fascinated to watch how that evolves as well, because I do think that will be an attraction point for some students. Like, I can kind of get this lecture in a bunch of different ways. What's unique about coming to class, and how's that evolves?
Yes, and we're seeing so much work from our own questioning the modality pieces. What's great to be able to review over and over online versus what are the things that we really think is important. Someone show up to a physical classroom because they're engaging with others in teamwork, or making a speech in front of people is part of a practice that we want them to do, et cetera. So I think it'll vary a lot by discipline, but I think it's an amazing moment of evolution and innovation right now.
And Maria, just to build on that, we talked a little bit about this modality shift that we're seeing, but can you share a little bit about how the Learning Enterprise seeks to redesign your curriculum? Are you thinking about new ways to approach curriculum design?
Yeah, definitely. And like I said, we don't think it's a one size fits all, right? So we always tend to really, when you're designing anything, kind of the design based approach is to see like, what is your main user, your main learner in this case, and what do they need, right? So I feel like I'm trying to decide which one to talk about because we have so many different types of experiments we're running from a pedagogy standpoint. Maybe I'll give one example, which is our universal learner courses. That's one of the courses we embedded the Google IT certificate in. So that type of course is a asynchronous, highly scalable, self-paced course. The reason we designed it that way is to be able to offer it in a super low risk, affordable way to students. And so this type of course, our universal learner courses, you can take them without paying. So they're very low risk. You can try to see if you can work at the college level without having to pay thousands of dollars of tuition. And then you only pay if you pass and have the grade and want the academic credit. And then even then you only pay $400. So it's a really affordable way for people to start, folks that maybe haven't been in school for 5-6 years, or maybe are in high school and don't know if they're quite college ready. This is just a really great way for them to experiment to see if they can work at the college level. That, in order to be able to even offer that type of course, you need to completely redesign it in a way that is scalable and can make it affordable and financially sustainable for us, right? In that case, it took a whole redesign of the types of courses we were offering. We couldn't just offering them in a normal lecture style. Guess what? That didn't actually work for high school students to fit into our random college schedule. By making it self-paced, their teacher could actually take the course and create their own pace by their schedule, right? And so these are like minor tweaks that people necessarily maybe don't think make a big difference, but actually do, right? So you have to look at every component of design. Obviously, the pedagogy is critical, but even things as simple as the schedule that it's offered makes a difference. So every component needs to be redesigned. Another example that we have is our ASU local project. And that's an initiative that we started in downtown LA. And that was to bring our undergraduate degrees to downtown LA, and to do that in a way that really supported students that were rooted in their local communities, that couldn't just do online by itself because it was a little too unstructured, too flexible. That works for, again, another set of learners, but that specific population, we created a coaching model where they get to come to our downtown LA campus 2 days a week and work with a coach in a 35-person small cohort where they're supported throughout their whole journey and ensure like they're actually, watching their lectures, they're understanding it. They know who to go for tutoring. They understand things that are not taught through the academic part of the program, but things like well-being, time management, networking, resumes, internships, all these things, that's so easy for us to talk about. If you're a first generation college student, probably not going to even know the importance of those things or even know that they exist. And so we brought them explicitly into the classroom so that it's systematic and everyone has access to it versus, the person that took the initiative to go to the Career Services Center. Well, why do we have to wait till they come to the Career Services Center? Why not embed it as part of their program systemically? And so that was another program that we designed specifically for that, population. So that's our approach in general, is to think about what are learners that are underserved and how do we create programs to better serve them.
And building on sort of services for students, you all serve learners, from kindergarten to post-retirement. A lot of them, as you mentioned, are maybe first-generation college students. They're trying to find pathways into four-year schools. So there's really no one-size-fits-all advice, I imagine. So how are you thinking about counseling for these students and taking a different approach for the different students that you serve?
Right now, we're doing it by whatever they're engaged in, right? So the support comes with the specific offering they're engaging in at that moment. As we build out the lifelong learning component of it, which is, okay, now they're moving from being in a pipeline program, maybe they already graduated and now they're in their first job. Well, what do they need in their first job? You don't stop learning as soon as you graduate, right? There's all like, how are you actually successful in that first job? Or even how do you transition to a second job? How do you think about that? And so those parts we're still building out, but we really want to think about it as what we're calling a learner GPS system. And actually we were inspired by Google Maps that tells you, how to get to point A to point B. And here's 4 different ways. You could walk, you could take a train, you could take a car. Similar, how do we create a learning GPS that gives you all the different options to get from where you are to where you want to be? And it kind of goes to what we started the conversation with, which is not thinking about learners through an enrollment versus non-enrollment, but kind of treating them more as more of a network and ecosystem and subscription-based model, if that makes sense. And if you put that hat on, then it's, we're creating a coaching system and tech infrastructure that would allow us to know where is a learner in their learner GPS, in their learner journey, and then and be able to address that need that they have at that specific time. And then and that's where I think data analytics and having that tech-based infrastructure really comes in handy, because the only way you can keep track of someone over a lifetime is by use of technology, right? And understanding the history of their learning. So another component we're building out is called their digital wallet, and that could keep track of all their learning in this like blockchain, where they could basically, it's portable and they can take it to wherever they want, and they don't have to worry about things like, oh, I have to get a transcript from somewhere I graduated 10 years ago. And it's, we run into this all the time, especially with some of our global learners where they're, 30 years old. Like, I don't know how to get a high school transcript anymore. Like, what do I do? So that pocket or that wallet will follow the learner their whole life. So it's theirs, right? And they own it and it's portable. So they're component parts to what we're building that are not just the courses themselves, but rather all the support mechanisms around learning in general. We could imagine learners for years, maybe they're not even enrolled in anything. They're just kind of slowly engaging maybe in a community group, a community of practice. You're in biotech, you want to be part of a little biotech group that's keeping you up to date on what's happening in your industry. So I think we're also going to see a lot of evolution, how learners are being, how the learning is happening. And it's not just going to be in these, did you finish a course, right? But more tracking the actual learning outcomes.
I love that notion of a learning GPS. Great coined term there. So I guess building more on these expanded pathways, we're curious to hear your take on micro-credentials. So how do you see micro-credentials playing a role in reshaping the education landscape?
I think, there's a lot of different types of micro-credentials, but I think that they're going to be ever more important as we move forward. And for us, we were just talking about unlocking earning potential is really important, especially for what historically was considered a non-traditional student, right? The quicker we can get people the skills they need to get the economic opportunities that they want, the better, right? And that is not, and we see it along a continuum, which is why we said the learner GPS, this like lifelong learning push. It's not so much, it's because we want to acknowledge that people are learning pretty much every day, and the micro credentials will allow them to more quickly be able to say, I have these skills, I have these credentials, instead of the millions of people that we have even today in America, where they said, well, I think it's like 34 million adults that have 2 years of college, or like 3 years of college and never completed. And we act like they don't have a credential. Well, literally have 3 years of learning, or two, or even if they only had 1 year of learning. Why can't we capture the fact that those are real skills and, that they've learned, and real, just important parts of what's going to make them thrive and successful in life, and that employers could actually say, oh, great, you took, there's a way that they can show and prove that they have those skills and competencies. So us at ASU, we really love micro credentials, and it's all about being able to enable the learner to be able to prove and show everything that they can do, right? Because ultimately that's what it's all about.
And what do you see as the greatest barriers for adoption of these micro credentials?
Depends on I'm assuming you mean by universities versus learners, or both?
I would say by universities, but maybe also by employers.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think it's going to, for many, many years, frankly, learning, if you think about it, has enabled people to get jobs, but it's mostly been about, did they complete, and a signaling mechanism, which is why there's this like push towards prestige by universities to be like, well, if you went to a better university, that must mean you're going to be a better employee. Well, how do we know what they even learned in those during their pathway, right? And so if you take that more broadly, I think if there's really objective ways that can demonstrate to employers that people have the skills and competencies that they need to get those jobs, people will start clamoring for those credentials. And I think what that will mean is that universities will have to be a lot more intentional about the skills and competencies around those courses, by skills and micro credentials, to be able to really capture what students are learning. I mean, I find it really fascinating. I find engineering firms do this, right? Where they'll put together a task for an engineer, like a programming task. And it's like, okay, you've shown that you can do this. Most 90% of other jobs don't have that sort of even test, right? So how do they know that folks really have these skill sets? So I think it's going to be beneficial for learners being able to show the broad portfolio of skills and competencies they have, for universities to frankly be more objective. That way you can be more inclusive, and you can show that your quality is actually what your students learned, not who you excluded, but what your students learned, right? I think when we move towards that, hopefully, I think it'll break the stronghold of this prestige craziness that we have right now, because it'll force people to focus on the actual quality of the education and the actual skills being learned by learners and students.
Yeah.
So we're gonna, go back to, again, the GPS part of the conversation. I find fascinating. It's, I think, somewhat related to the micro credentials and the certs that we've been talking about. But one of the things that I've really been focused on, that I think companies like Google can help with, is trying to assist in the tracking of outcomes. How do we know where a learner ends up with an employer? Do we have a sense for how their career progresses after they've already made that investment with a particular institution or a cert? I do believe that there's a role certainly for companies like us to play in that, but I'm curious to hear how you're thinking about that, because I'm sure it has a lot to do with how do we engage with post graduation students or post credential students, and what do they need in that life stage and journey that is well beyond our initial engagement. I feel like there's a lot of work to be done, but maybe you're about to tell me you've moved that needle pretty far.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's such a great point, John. And I think we'll need to partner with folks like Google in thinking through this, but that is our goal. I don't think we have a mechanism to do that yet. That's what I was talking about, that digital wallet that allows the progression and like your skills and credential to kind of stack. And so if we have access to that, then a learner can both have access to all of that, but then we can see, oh, they're at this job, this is their skills. To get to the next level, they're going to need the following 5 more, right? Or a set of these. And we can actually then offer them, hey, if you're interested in becoming a manager now in your industry / career, if you're interested in, whatever their interest may be, then we can target to exactly the learning that they need. And that's what I'm saying. I think that's going to require a lot of data analytics and in tech infrastructure to be able to really target learners in that level of specificity. That's just not possible right now.
Yeah, it was an interesting conversation I had with a new member of our team that we just hired from outside the company. And she was saying, the university doesn't even know what I'm doing today. And she didn't mean that necessarily about her specifically, although that would be true. But I think most of our alma maters know what we're doing today and how that's evolved. In other words, what is the initial investment in our degree netted? It would obviously benefit the school to know this from a couple of different angles. One, then how can they assist career paths the way that you're talking about? But two, also justifying the initial investment, how that might play forward. And this one in particular, outstanding resume, had big jobs in Silicon Valley before that, had actually been on the academic side at elite institutions. I think her alma mater would benefit from knowing exactly what that path has been like for her, and then maybe be able to assist her along the way and different parts of that as we learn this kind of, I'm using your GPS vernacular, but as we start to understand and aggregate, because we have the data at our disposal, here are the likely skills that people that are following this track may need.
Exactly.
Our data will tell you that most learners, when they think of upskilling and reskilling, they think of universities first today. They want to go to universities first today. But quickly following behind that are short courses, credential system, all those kinds of things. In other words, there's an opportunity, I think, for our universities to lead right now, because I think the market wants them to. But if people aren't thinking about this enough, as it always happens, others will jump into that vacuum and try to solve.
Yeah, exactly. No, we're definitely on the same page there, John. And I would even take it a step further, as I would love to, speaking about your specific example and your colleague, enable her to actually give back. And so by even knowing where they are, there's the component I didn't talk about in the ASU ecosystem is the community portion of it, right? So I talked about Learner GPS, the wallet, and there's also this community aspect to it where I'm sure students or learners that see, your colleague's amazing career and think about, well, I'd love to do that. And then perhaps she would want to be able to say, I'd love to give back, have a lecture on a specific thing, do a podcast, et cetera. How do we enable experts and professionals to also become educators and mentors to a whole new generation? And I think there's a hunger for that I see from folks that we would love to empower and enable.
Well, thank you, Maria. We like to end each of our segments with a Head of the Class award. So we'd love to hear your thoughts on, who is someone in the education space who is making big waves and progress? So who would you sort of recognize as head of the class?
Great question. I'd like to really recognize the Campaign for College Opportunity, and Michelle Cisquieros, the executive director there. I think as in the education space, sometimes we forget about the people in the background there's actually a lot of policies, laws in place that are, kind of prevent some of the innovation because of the structures that are currently in place. And so organizations like the Campaign for College Opportunity are always basically advocating and figuring out where are those policy gaps and how can they push forward legislation and reforms that will make education a lot more accessible and affordable. And that is a really important part of the ecosystem too that we don't normally talk about. So I really admire the work that they do because we need folks and organizations like that advocating on that side as we innovators and operators are pushing on our side. Policy and law needs to change as well and evolve with us.
Well, thank you. And, something I really appreciated from our talk today, and also something that I appreciate about ASU as a whole, is just your focus on, not measuring success by things like acceptance rate, but really focusing on who you include and how you succeed. So thank you for bringing that perspective today. And thank you to ASU for really shepherding that approach. We really enjoyed our talk today, learning more about the learning enterprise, your strong focus on access, and how you're thinking about expanded pathways. So thank you again. We really enjoyed this exchange of ideas.
Maria, let me echo Jenny's sentiment, and thank you for coming out. I've been fortunate enough to talk to you several times. I always learn something. I always come away inspired by what ASU is doing, what you're pushing as one of the innovators in our space. And also, I think you're highlighting the campaign for college opportunity. I'm not surprised that you highlighted that, because I do think it's part of the ethos that ASU is walking now, which is there are a lot of special things happening in Tempe. How do we get the maximum amount of people exposed to those? And I think we're at a time where the technology can really expand and liberate that content, that instruction, for opportunities really globally at this point, right? And it's been fun to watch. I know we've talked about that before, but it's been great to give our audience a little bit of what we get to speak with you about somewhat frequently, and anxious to see where you and your team take ASU going forward, because I do think it's doing a lot to innovate such an important part of the education ecosystem.
Thank you so much for even inviting me to join you in this conversation. It's always a pleasure, and we really enjoy your partnership here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And to our audience, thank you for tuning in again. For more great content and interviews, please be sure to like and subscribe below. And we hope to see you on a future episode.